All right, we're live.
Good evening, my friends. It is 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 5 Mountain, where I am. It is Wednesday, November 16th, and I am Kyle Seraphin. Thanks so much for joining me with some of my thoughts. I brought a special guest on today that we are going to do kind of an interview, but more of just a free-form discussion. We're calling this episode After the Arrest. I think a lot of people have minimal visibility about what goes on in the FBI, and that's part of the reason why I've been kind of involved in trying to explain what happens and how it works and some of the things that you may not see, terminology, kind of the inside baseball that your tax dollars are paying for. And what I've got is a special guest who worked out of the District of New Mexico for a number of years. I guess he'll be able to tell us exactly how many, but enough to retire, it sounds like. So this is Reeve Swainston, who is a former AUSA and assistant United States attorney. And that is a federal prosecutor. That's somebody that takes the cases from the FBI, sometimes recommends a case to the FBI, and brings that into, both the prosecutorial end of things. So they're the ones that handle the plea deals. And so for all of you folks that have an interest, what happens after the FBI shows up at your door, after a search warrant happens, and where they do, how the legal process works. That's what we're going to talk about, and we'll probably talk about what's broken and if we have any ideas on how to fix it. But I'm sure that'll be plenty. So, Reeve, welcome to the show and welcome to hanging out with me and producer Phil.
Thank you so much. You can already tell that I'm a Zoom virgin. So I forgot to put on my silent, and I just did that while you were talking. Yeah, it's
No
good to
big
be
deal.
here. Yeah, good to be here.
I kind
I'm
of want to be where you
excited
are.
for
That
the
fire looks
opportunity.
nice.
I thought that our millions of viewers would really enjoy it. So why not? I have it. It's beautiful. It feels nice and warm right behind me, and I've got a nice view of the sunset here in New Mexico, and my amazing 10-month-old German Shepherd puppy wandering around doing her thing.
Yeah, I
It
think we're going
couldn't
to see
be
some
any
of her.
better. It couldn't be any better. I just wish it was in a state where citizens felt safer. To
For
put it
sure. And
bluntly.
I've had some folks, we want to talk about the crime crisis that's happening in many major cities. In Albuquerque, where you're at, or outside of, is no stranger to that sort of thing. I think Albuquerque's had some violence for a long time, but it used to be more compartmentalized. And um, so let's just kind of talk about, first of all, you were an enlisted Marine at the age of 17, which we were just talking about a moment ago. You went in to go be what, a machine gunner? Does that sound right?
Yes, I was a machine gunner. Um, MOS is 0331. And I got pretty lucky for the first 2 years, even though I was a machine gunner. I got sent to Europe for a couple of years. And I don't want to bore you with a long historical background. Um, but, it did help make me who I am. I got very lucky when I was in Europe to have met or become part of a detail. Back then, the commander of Air Force Southern Europe was a general who took an interest in me and helped guide me towards higher education, which was not something that was ever even discussed in my family when I was growing up. And to this day, I'm still in touch with him, and he became probably the single most important mentor in my life. And I've been lucky enough to have a couple of really good men who helped me evolve as a both as a man and then later on as a professional in federal law enforcement. So
Sure.
yep, and then after that, after I was assigned to him, and not just him, but the security of installations, property people, you name it, in Southern Europe. It was called Allied Forces Southern Europe. It still exists. I think it's in a different part of
Sure.
the country now, though.
Yep.
Um, I went back to the fleet where I was an actual machine gunner, did that for a couple of years. But during that entire time, I took a lot of college classes and managed, once I was discharged from the Marines, to transfer my credits into the University of New Mexico, where I just hit the ground running. It took me a few years, but I ended up becoming what I call a GI Bill lawyer,
Nice.
and was lucky enough to, after a few years in as a state prosecutor in Philadelphia, to get connected with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia as a special assistant, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and then as a
now,
AUSA.
When did you?
90s,
Where did you go to law school?
University of New Mexico. I finished my undergrad at UNM, and then just walked across the street to University of New Mexico School of Law.
So what brought you? How did you get to Philly then?
My wife's from Philly. I lived there for a little bit as a child. I really, I think my childhood could be described this way. Raised by a single mother, a foreigner with a seventh grade education who really was more of a roommate than a parent.
Mm-hmm.
She did her best. I did everything I could to support my brother and her and myself, worked very hard as a child. I was a child laborer, if you will, washing pots and pans at a local restaurant or mowing lawns for a landscaping company, whatever it took. And then I joined the Marines in part because my recruiter said I could send half my paycheck home and my brother would get a winter jacket and food in the fridge. That is the nuts and bolts of it. My mom essentially said, raise yourselves, go be feral children. And thankfully, it didn't go in the direction it could have gone, like it does with so many kids who are raised that way.
No, so many. I mean, that's a lot of the people that we see in the law enforcement realm are people that started off feral, maybe with not some bad intentions, and then they end up on the wrong side. And it doesn't take too many steps before you kind of run down that path permanently, I think, or at least semi-permanently.
So you ended up those steps.
So you end up as a special prosecutor, and then did you get hired on as a AUSA out there, or did you come back to New Mexico for that?
I did, but I transferred to New Mexico. My mom had a stroke. Long story, my mom had a stroke, and I managed to get the job here in New Mexico rather than in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And I'm very grateful for that. So I managed to come back here, deal with some family issues, and had a great career here. It was a total of 22 years in federal service. I think my total time in New Mexico is 15, 16 years, something like that.
Okay. All right. So what year, just for perspective, did you start as an AUSA? You say you got 22 years of that. Give me that so people can kind of see, because the world has changed dramatically. And some of my friends have tried to pick a date when that happened. I'm curious what you think that when that started changing over, but when did you start specifically?
So for me, it would be right around 2000.
Okay. So pre 9/11 though.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to see a little bit of that.
Yep, a little bit of that, and that was as a special assistant. I was a prosecutor in in the city of Philadelphia, and also surrounding county, a nearby county.
Sure.
So enough. I mean, that's the general perspective of it. And then managed to get back here permanently. And I had some health issues, so I had to take my vested and I got a combination of my vested / disability retirement. And thankfully, I was able to do it, put it all together for a full retirement.
I love it.
Puppy's going full-blown puppy right now. I may have to, when you go to our other friend, I might have to put her into a crate or something. Let me know.
Fair enough.
If our audience complains or anything.
I don't know if there's any complaints. We're just running by the seat of our pants here. So a little bit of puppy time doesn't upset anybody. I got to do a long discussion actually today on Truth Social. Somebody was saying something about something I wrote. I basically said if somebody came to my door and tried to force a vaccine shot on my children, that they would find themselves being recycled by the coyotes. I don't know where that concept came from, but that was my general idea. I'm a pretty aggressive protector. I think
can do it right here.
You
can do it right here at 4 a.m. Coyotes are plentiful.
That's right. And so somebody said something about coyotes, wish they had them. And I said, yeah, sometimes when you have them, you wish you didn't. And I posted a video of a thermal camera that I had that I shot a coyote on my buddy's ranch because they were running down after his calves and his cows. And, it hit the wrong chord with certain people, which is kind of funny. And there's I think it's one of the big divides in this country is the way that people live in urban areas and they live in rural areas. And if you don't have a lot of experience with that, and you don't know that coyotes are a real problem for ranchers and for beef cattle and for people who have chickens and goats and sheep and all that. Maybe you don't have the same perspective on maybe dropping them down. Like I don't feel great about shooting dogs but they're not the same as your puppy right there. I mean, they're just an animal altogether. So we had this just prolonged, long, protracted discussion about shooting coyotes and how you do it and what calibers and whether it's wrong and whether people were mad about it. It was really funny. It was not what I thought my day was going to go into, but it was a long discussion about them. And that's a big thing in New Mexico, obviously. I mean, I spent a lot of time doing that with my buddy, and yeah, I'm sure you
Well,
got
we
to
can talk about
keep on.
coyotes in New Mexico, but they'll be the humankind.
That's right. Yeah. And I know you had some border experience doing that.
And
And you sent me a good article about cartel stuff. So, you know, maybe you could tell me what your most proud case was, and we can certainly jump into that if that was it, or we can get into it in a second too. But, you know, what was your most proud prosecution, or maybe your most proud moment working in federal service, if you can think of it?
I had quite a few. I had when I look back at my career, I feel very fortunate. I did. I don't even know how many. Many wiretap, long-term, complex litigation, wiretap investigations that I supervised with FBI, DEA. Later on in my career, with Homeland Security agents. Early in my career, I did a ton of the essentially snatch and grab, if you will, quick hit cases involving repeat violent offenders, which never goes out of style. It's a need that every community has. Yep. Unfortunately, enforcement of that continues to decline, especially here in New Mexico. I'm hearing all sorts of horror stories of offenders who are being released on what I would consider more modern, sensitive, and very inappropriate for very inappropriate reasons that really are terribly inconsistent with both the advancement of justice and the caretaking responsibility that we in law enforcement have for the community. And sure. I hear that now from my former colleagues. But in terms of the case,
well, tell me too, when you say repeat violent offenders, what kind of violence are we looking at? Just so people have an idea. I mean, everybody uses the word, but not everybody has the same view that you're going to have.
Well, I mean, it can be anything from somebody putting a gun in your face and telling you what's yours is now mine. Mm-hmm. And that person being arrested for that offense, and at the state level getting out that day or the next day and doing it again and again and again and again. That is when those people become what I think we in our profession classify as repeat violent offenders. And it can be anything from, I mean, I swear it can be an attempted murder charge that they're released on. But unfortunately, what I'm also hearing at the federal level, at my alma mater, I guess at our alma mater at DOJ, is a reduction in the number and quality and complexity of cases that are accepted by U.S. attorneys' offices all around the country. I'm not zeroing in on New Mexico, but when I say there's a more modern, sensitive approach to law enforcement and targeting offenders, I mean it. And what I mean is the reality is that cases that I would have taken in my career, when an agent like you brought me a case and said, I got a guy that just stuck a gun in somebody's face at this such and such store, corner store, took $25 worth of coins in that what we call Hobbs Act robbery. Right. It would be a no-brainer complaint. Let's whip out a complaint, take it to the magistrate, and we'll knock out a case. Another example might be, let's not forget the drug trafficking crisis that we've been prosecuting forever. And people can have whatever opinions they want on that, but the reality is really crystal clear. The drug trafficking in New Mexico and other border states is so consequential, it results in loss of life. Mm-hmm. There can be no ambiguity whatsoever about that. And it doesn't need to be the fentanyl discussion either. It can be any variety of hard drugs, mostly, obviously, that result in the loss of life. I've been to a number of funerals in New Mexico over the years. The scenario is always the same. The mother talks about her child. getting becoming interested in alcohol, becoming interested in weed, becoming interested in harder drugs, and then eventually they die of a black tar heroin overdose.
Yeah.
And so, it's a community level approach. It's a law enforcement approach, but all of that has to work together, and none of it works if one part of it is ignored.
My instinct on that has always been sort of anybody who's willing to break federal laws, whether it be trafficking a substance that we don't care about. So, for example, I'm not emotionally connected to marijuana. I have brothers that use it, and it's been state legalized in so many places, including New Mexico and now in Arizona as well. And I don't really feel one way or another about it. If it's against the law, it should be against the law, and if it's not, it's not. But people who are willing to break certain laws, I find that they're willing to do a lot more things once they've kind of crossed that boundary. Is that more or less your experience as well, or do you have a different take on it?
And the other perspective on that is, if a marijuana case catches the attention of the feds, so to speak, it's probably something huge. And I mean, one of the cases that I handled, that I'm actually quite proud of, I handled with DEA. It was a simple interdiction case, turned into not a wiretap case, but a very long-term grand jury investigation where we discovered that OGs, Bloods out of Los Angeles, were building and developing and managing and running a huge trucking company. And all they did in New Mexico, in a trucking company designed to transport huge amounts, thousands and thousands of pounds of marijuana, cocaine, and then bulk cash came back to Phoenix and Los Angeles. But that case was interesting because all it was an interdiction case where a state police officer found a pretty significant load of marijuana. I forget the exact amount, maybe 10,000 pounds, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize that when we talk about marijuana in a federal level, you've had AUSAs. What the famous case that one of my buddies went through, where the guy goes, we found a lot of weed, and he goes, well, how much? And he goes, I don't know, a lot. And he goes, would it fill up my office? Like that's the kind of weed we're talking about. Would it fill up the office we're talking in right now? Kind of weed. Right.
But that case was that exactly that, and people who are willing to do that, knowing that they're facing at that time 10 years to life in prison, are a special kind of case. They are career offenders. These are people engaged in the kind of drug trafficking that is a business. It's a job. And so, that case went from one interdiction to eventually indicting 13 or 14 people, all part of the gang out of LA. And it was a very successful case. Managed to infiltrate and dismantle that entire organization, and learned later on that the brothers who were running that business were both involved in homicides and other violent activities. And then one of the brothers, when he got out of prison, was killed. He was murdered within weeks of getting out of jail. So is that part of the community that is engaged in that kind of activity that I perceive to be a no holds barred type of activity, and a very worthy target for federal interest.
Yeah,
and I think
a lot of times I think, So I've had discussions with.
We're not investigating those cases anymore.
Sure, the transactional business, that's the bread and butter of these kind of things. Yep.
Yeah. Every case starts at a nucleus somewhere.
And anybody that's willing to do that, I mean, they're predatory, right? I mean, they're taking advantage of softness or weakness in the system. Everybody is available. If you're not going to play by the rules that everybody else agreed to sign up and do, which is the American federal system that we have, if you're not going to obey the law, then you're going to go do whatever makes sense to you, and you're a danger to everybody else that is playing by the rules. And
my perspective on marijuana, we really shouldn't waste some time talking about it too much.
Yeah, no, I agree.
My perspective is very simple. If Congress decides to take it off the schedule or to decriminalize it, then so be it. Yes. But Congress has never decided to do that.
No, the
agent's job and the prosecutor's job is to enforce the laws on the books. It's on the books still. It should be enforced. That really is awkward. My perspective.
There's nothing more awkward than leaving. I've left weed on search warrants. I've served search warrants when we were going for PCP and for paraphernalia and for manufacturing in DC, and people would be shocked. It's like we took the guns because he was a felon, and we took the paraphernalia and the manufacturing equipment, and we took residue, and we left like a bag of weed on the countertop. And I just went, "Are we going to take this?" And they go, "No." And you go, "Why?" That was my first day. My first day, we left weed on a search warrant, and I've never collected it since then. It's never been enough to meet any federal minimums, and you just think that seems bizarre. But I agree with you. Congress either needs to step up and do the job, or we need to enforce it. But this sort of like prosecutorial discretion that it's not important enough for it to worry about, it seems wrong.
Prosecutorial discretion exists, but it shouldn't be to completely ignore laws. And that exactly. Is the same problem that we have on the border. But before we do that, I do want to talk about one case that I had. I sent you the article of it. It was written about by Judy Miller, formerly from the New York Times. The article was titled "The Mexicanization of American Law Enforcement." I was very proud of that case because it involved a New Mexico State police officer and a local sheriff up in the Four Corners area of New Mexico. And I could literally talk forever about that case, but those officers had infiltrated the region task force up there. I think it was Region 2 task force. I forget the exact region. As you know, in New Mexico, there's multiple region task force where local law enforcement, state law enforcement, tribal law enforcement are brought in to work with federal agents, and they're, in doing so, essentially become the same as federal agents and able to bring cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office, manage wiretaps, things like that. And these officers, when they work for the task force, were engaged in some truly insidious and dangerous activities, including selling daytime and location of pending search warrants, names and identities of undercover agents, names and identities of confidential sources. Truly a very significant betrayal of the trust that the FBI had put into them. And when the FBI came to me with that case, frankly, we couldn't believe it. We were shocked. I was shocked. I didn't want to believe it.
Now, this was done under a public corruption category. Is that kind of how they did it?
No,
or was it more aggressive?
No. It was done as a drug trafficking case, and thankfully it was, because we didn't have to worry about management from the mothership. We just dealt with it as a drug trafficking case. And so I ended up charging, once we were able to get enough evidence, ended up charging the officers as well as to use a business analogy, the Four Corners region supervisor of the Juarez cartel, basically with just drug trafficking conspiracy. And but that case was important to me because during the course of that investigation, we picked up wiretap communication that the organization was very angry at a local sheriff's deputy who was essentially angering the organization for interfering with their drug trafficking success.
Right.
Picking off couriers, picking off low-level people.
Just doing his job.
Just doing his job. And but the communications that we were intercepting progressively became more and more, I'll say, unsettling. And without getting into great detail, the conversations that the FBI on the wiretap and myself deemed most problematic were the ones that communicated either a threat, an intent to do harm, or an intent to kill.
Right.
And we ended up bringing the wiretap down a little bit premature, solely because we had to address that human caretaking issue.
Right. Now, will you kind of get in?
That really meant a lot to me, because who knows what would have happened had we not been on that wire.
Well, and maybe you can kind of explain to people too, because I don't think so. First of all, maybe you could talk a little bit about the burden that people have to bring up a Title III, which is not an easy burden to meet necessarily. But if you do it a lot, I know there's specialists in it that crush it. And then the second thing is that once it's up, especially the FBI, we can agree, doesn't really like to take them down, even though they're expensive to maintain. They love it because the FBI loves intel. So maybe you can kind of flesh out what that looked like for bringing it up. Number one,
I
so
mean,
people have a sense.
sure. I mean, I've had, not even necessarily this case, but a variety of cases with other agencies and FBI, DEA, you name it. These wiretaps are very expensive. I don't know the exact number, but let's just say they're $100,000 a month to run.
Mm-hmm.
They're critically important tools in law enforcement. They're exceptionally difficult to get approved. People think that we just snap our fingers and we jump on people's phones. We don't. It's
No.
very, very difficult. It's a hard process. The AUSA works very closely, or at least I did. I made sure that my wiretaps, and I embrace them as my wiretaps because it's my application to the court. And the agent's affidavit is simply an exhibit. It's exhibit A,
Mm-hmm.
And so I present my application to the court, swear it out. And when I do so not only proving probable cause exists with respect to the need to utilize this tool, but also that all other reasonable law enforcement strategies and other law enforcement tools that we have at our disposal are simply insufficient to accomplish the goals of the wiretap, which is always, or at least almost always, to work our way up to the highest level of any particular organization that we're targeting, right?
Right.
And very typically, it's true, you can't reach those levels without picking apart the lower level echelon as you work your way up.
And maybe you could tell people too what the lesser versions of things. So we have to obviously use by less invasive means than tapping the phone. So give some examples of what you would like to see when you want to see that approved, and you're going to go in front of a judge.
There are countless examples. I mean, the most obvious is you could do very overt things like search warrants. But the problem with doing a search warrant before you get a wiretap is you alert the organization that you're targeting them. So you want to scratch out the search warrants, but it is a tool that you can use. But it's a tool in the application that you say, if we did a search warrant, we would alert the organization that we're targeting them, and we don't want to alert the organization that we're targeting them because it's too critical that we keep this secret. And it's very legitimate. It's an extremely appropriate stance to take in federal law enforcement. Many other tools to get up on the wiretap. Obviously, we want to see communications. A real life example is we should not be seeing a phone that we know to belong to a cartel member linked with a Region 2 task force member immediately after every single task force meeting, even if it goes through an intermediary. There's this constant flow of communication. We shouldn't see that because it's obviously not a human source. The cartel member is a known target. And if he was a source, we would certainly know that.
And you're seeing those phones by doing other less invasive means than a wiretap.
Yeah,
so we're getting toll records
a subpoena to the service provider, pen trap and trace, which is just an order issued by a magistrate judge, just to see the numbers, things like that. It's another common example. You can jump into the bank accounts to see if there's structuring activity. So a lot of times drug traffickers, they'll have a lot of bulk cash. They will want to cleanse that cash so that they can go buy a truck or something. And you'll see organizations like the organization, the Bloods that we had, they would send lower level people in their organization out in the hundreds to go to post offices all around the country. So, I mean, we had them hitting post offices to get postal money orders with, $3,000 at a time. And they would just come back to LA with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of postal money orders. It's another thing that we would look for is the flow of cash. And then you just put all that together, and there are many, many other tools, but you put all that together and you present it to the court. And either the judge agrees or doesn't agree that you need this very invasive tool, candidly, very invasive tool, to target this organization for a higher purpose, which is always to work your way up to the very top of the organization.
And then guys like Phil and I get that's right. We get pulled in on midnight shifts to listen because we got to clean all the information as well.
that's right. And we could bring in interpreters and in the whole 9 yards. So,
Yep.
and then I get the 3 a.m. calls. Hey, we just intercepted a call, and they say they're heading over to. They're going to go murder somebody, but of course, we don't want to burn the wire. It's a very common conversation. So, how do you not burn the wire? So you work through that problem, and very typically, you can involve either members of the task force who are also have access to patrol vehicles, and you can do a lawful stop or a random stop to prevent the possibility of violence,
Sure.
or you burn the wire to
Save the
prevent
life.
the possibility of violence. So
Right.
those are the two typical problems that you have to face in the middle of the night, like you said, and pulling the midnight shift.
Yeah. And as you mentioned to me when we were talking earlier, it's one of those things where the FBI wants to keep that wire up because it took a lot of work to get it there, and they don't want to burn it. And and I'm sure every other law enforcement agency is the same. The amount of effort and the infrastructure that takes place to be able to get those things going, and even just building out the shifts and pulling people from other work, it's like there's a lot of things in place, and there's a lot of information that can come in. So if you can cover it, the fun thing is that when you do have task force officers like that and peace officers in the state, a probable cause stop, almost everybody's driving around with something that they can hit you for some PC and pull you over if you're smart.
Motor,
which
right?
is
Motor vehicle code violation, not hard.
Yep,
Sasha,
definitely.
don't take my jacket away. What are you doing?
All right. So you were telling me, and the case that we saw that you sent me in the article was what 2007, 2008, something like that.
I think it was 2007. Right? Yeah, 2007.
Okay. All right. So the specifics were we've got this cop on the task force. Two of them sounds like that were on the take that are getting money from the Juarez cartel, and they are handing out information left and right. And then you guys got the kind of the tip for violence. I remember you telling me how specific it got, and I think that'd be really interesting to folks to hear.
Right. Well, I'm not going to get as specific on a podcast, but what I am going to say is that I was concerned, and many others were concerned, that when you start hearing that kind of language of potential violence, it's time to address the issue in the kind of way that might mean losing $100,000 on a wiretap.
What was your pushback from our end of things, from the federal side? If you got some
pushback, no real pushback, just a lot of communication, just hard communication. Like this is, like you said earlier, very difficult to do. And Sasha, you're crazy. It's very difficult to do, very expensive. And is there any way we can keep the wire up without having to worry about losing this opportunity to continue working our way up in the organization? And it was clear that at that point we had to take action, and so we did. Yeah.
Yep. And the life was spared, and appropriate intervention was done. Which, folks, I don't remember how much was actually in the article and how much came from you.
You don't know whether or not someone's going to take action, but that's also the problem. That is the problem.
Well, and if you don't do something, you're gambling with somebody else's life.
100%.
What's a bigger stake than that?
You don't keep a wiretap, and I think anyone, once you work your way through the formula of that problem, nobody would disagree that $100,000 a month is worth. I should have put you in the crate, girl. Down.
You're good. I think it's good because I could have a toddler come in at any moment, is my thought. Like there could be a small person that comes in and tries to throw something at me, or wants to explain to me how we need to go to the park first thing in the morning, even though it's still dark out right now. The dog's no big deal. So you saw successful prosecutions. Did you do national security work too? That was my Did we talk about that a little bit?
I did do a little bit of it. I was one of the attorneys pulled to DC to handle some of the Gitmo cases, but of course, we can't talk about those cases.
No, but we could talk about kind of the differential and the attitude that you see in, from your end, looking at prosecutions and specifically even just the type of investigators that go that route. Because I think a lot of people are concerned. One of the things that I've noticed is the FBI is far more intelligence focused now than they were when you started, working with them as partners.
No doubt about it. There's been many, many discussions that I've had. Let me just say this. I hope that the agents I work with know that I gave them everything I had especially in the prime of my career. I had multiple surgeries that are really not relevant to this towards the end of my career. That became, when a judge is looking down from on high and saying, Mr. Swainston, do you need a break in the middle of a jury trial? That's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I think I had a very good relationship. My agents trusted me to put in the work, and I did put in the work. And so, what I but one of the things I did see along the way was the bureaucracy on the agency side that I didn't appreciate, to put it bluntly.
Yep.
I'm not okay with an FBI lawyer telling me that I need to change something in an affidavit that I'm not willing to change, and I won't.
And that you're putting your name to
now, that I'm putting my name to,
right.
And so I think AUSAs in the field who have to actually swear these things out, they better be willing to push back, because the court down the road, whether it be the Court of Appeals or even at the district court level, will never know who that lawyer was. And so I've been, that is something inside the FBI that I didn't appreciate. I heard some things that were kind of funny. That surprises me now about how aggressive the FBI is. And like I said, I'm on here to talk about law enforcement, the needs for law enforcement now with our crime crisis and that kind of thing. But when I've heard FBI agents in the past say things like the first rule of the FBI is to protect the FBI.
That's correct.
And then I see the absolutely unambiguous reality that we have now. Makes me very sad, having worked with what I believe to be the greatest federal law enforcement entity on the planet. FBI, DEA, those agencies were superior agencies that were built with high quality people. Mm-hmm. That is 99% of my experience. But the FBI cannot say now that it does not have a problem with perception, that it is not behaving in a way that is consistent with what I called earlier its caretaking responsibility to the community. When you have a director who's incapable of explaining why it is that he allowed cities to burn, and I'm just talking to you as a grunt federal prosecutor, truly incapable of explaining why agents weren't put out there on the front lines where they belong. I'm just the soft lawyer in the background. You guys have both the fun work and the dangerous work. Mm-hmm. But you swore an oath to put yourselves in harm, and to be incapable of explaining why it is that one set of protesters, and don't get me wrong, January 6th protesters, they're terrible. They should go to jail. If the evidence shows that they violated the law, throw the book at them. I don't care.
Sure. As long as it's evenly applied.
You can't have that kind of aggression and do nothing about billions and billions of dollars of destruction in our cities. You can't have federal law enforcement agencies, U.S. Marshals in Portland, risking their lives night after night after night, and then not require that when they get sued, that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Portland doesn't even represent the agents who are expected to put their lives on the line to protect the building where the judges are supposed to be safe.
They didn't scope them on those things, which is it's a big deal.
That stuff, from a purely grunt perspective, from me, really bothers me. It makes me think, well, I put myself out on the line many times in my career. I wanted to make sure my community's safe. I worked with very, very aggressive agents, and I loved working with aggressive agents. Mm-hmm. We, I think, made a difference in this community by virtue of the fact that we were willing to play smash mouth with the kind of organizations that have no problems playing smash mouth with us,
right?
And with the community.
Yeah. Do you think the guys that you worked with, guys and gals that were in the kind of doing the the front end work of violent crime, were they empowered by, from what you saw, from the field office level, were they empowered to go out there and do enforcement actions if they were witnessing an actual, an ongoing crime, or if there was a violent threat that happened? Because my sense is, and this is just, I haven't put it to the test, but I was in Portland for 2 weeks while they were burning the city down. It was towards the tail end of the 100 days. It was October-ish or something like that. And maybe the end of September and October in 2020. And so it's like, I know that if I saw something happening and I tried to intervene, there is almost no chance that the Bureau would have backed my play. I would have been right. I would have been doing the thing that was right. I would have been doing the thing that you would expect a federal agent to step up and do, witnessing actual violence, even if it was like someone attacking a cop from behind, hitting him in the head with a brick. It's my job to get out there and do something. Do you think that they would have been supported during your time?
Yeah, I think so. I do. I think so. For most of my time,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little less so towards the end of my time. But what I will tell you from a citizen's perspective, that if an agent sees an Antifa member smacking a cop on the back of the head with a baseball bat, and that agent doesn't intervene to help,
Mm-hmm.
then that agent doesn't deserve to be an agent.
I agree.
With all due respect.
I mean, I agree, and that's the sad thing, is because they may be throwing their career to the wind. But I think that if you can't, what do you? Somebody told me this, because we were talking about Uvalde, and that was one of those things that really troubled me. And I can't remember if you and I talked about it too, but it's like, what are you saving it for? To die in a hospital bed? Go do your job. If your job goes
100%.
away and leaves you behind, so be it. And I think that comes from that enlisted perspective that you have about some of us just that's the work. My buddy Steve Friend has said the same thing. It's kind of like, this is the job. If the job leaves you, so be it. I actually wrote something very similar to my ASAC, and I think I wrote it to the Deputy Assistant Director of Human Resources, but it was something to the effect of, it's like, if this is not my time to serve or my way to serve, then so be it.
I'm still
I'll
with
step
you.
off.
I'm going to touch my fire here for a second.
I see that. Yeah, that's fine. And it's one of those things. It's like, if you don't have the ability to lose the job, and I think that should be a prequel for every FBI director. If you're not willing to lose your job over the right reasons, then you shouldn't be taking that job at all. And that's kind of what I see right now.
Yeah, but what bothers me is there shouldn't even be a discussion of any possibility of losing your job when all you're doing is protecting the public against violence.
Yep.
So, I mean, to say Antifa is a thought, not an organization, is a joke.
I've had that said to me, though.
Antifa should be completely dismantled. It should be eviscerated from any discussion in law enforcement, and it should have happened a long time ago.
Well, and there's no question that they're organized, because we saw it. We saw it. We were tracking the organization in Portland. Like, we tracked
it. Their behavior is that of an organized criminal enterprise.
Correct. No question about it. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I saw it. It's like, they had anybody that has resupply drops and logistical concerns and fundraising wings and comms and spotters and assessors that are trying to make sure they have counter surveillance and whatnot. Because I got picked up on that. Some of my buddies got chased off by, people on bicycles and a security team. That was all stuff that happened. They weren't scary, in fact, but we weren't empowered to do anything about it because we were in a watch only scenario. And so there's something really sad about being told Antifa is an idea and we really love political activists. You're in Portland. That's just not what you want to hear when you're an FBI agent. Your fire looks good now, though. Well done.
Thank you. Well, I'll tell you this much with all due humility. I can guarantee you this, that if me and a few of the agents I work with throughout my career decided to go after Antifa in the same way that I went after truck drivers who were transporting bulk cash and thousands of pounds of weed and cocaine, and the same way I went after corrupt law enforcement or any criminal organization, I guarantee you, without any hesitation in my voice, I hope, that there's no way I wouldn't be able to prove an ongoing criminal organization.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just as a surveillance guy watching out there, you could see it. It's there. But whether it be using comms together, whether it be, sending people to go and spot and then sending another team on. I mean, we had their radio transmissions. They use FRS radio, so we could hear them, and we recorded it. So all that evidence was available to us, and it just didn't go anywhere. We haven't seen any prosecution. So it's pretty shocking to me. Um,
Okay. Well, it's gonna get dark here for a second, but I'm gonna put my dog in the crate because
fair enough.
just a little too crazy right now.
I hear you. I hear it. I'm curious. Did you ever see like a time, or was there like a threshold where we crossed over and you started seeing the hiring change? I think one of the things that people have said is that the aggression, the ability to do so, it happened in the FBI. I don't know what the turning point was, but I know what happened. And did you know, I wasn't there, so maybe you saw it in DOJ when people were bringing these line prosecutors on that didn't have the same maybe tenacity that you would have to run stuff down, and maybe the spine to push back when it needed to be.
Yeah, I can't really say that that was a big part of my career. Even towards the tail end, I was generally impressed with most of the prosecutors. But what I have heard now um, is that we're getting, when I started out, a typical hire was somebody who had a number of years like I did, trying case after case after case. I mean, I don't think that a lawyer who got, a trial lawyer
Mm-hmm.
who got smacked around a little bit in court and lost a handful of cases is a bad thing, right?
Sure.
I think it's a
They
good
definitely
thing.
avoid it now, right?
And what I've seen now is, and what I hear in the last few years, especially now, is there's this avoidance of risk, and that's wrong. You can't have that.
Sure.
You have to have young lawyers, or if they're not not young but inexperienced trial attorneys, willing to take cases with, for example, purely circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a challenge, right?
What I'm hearing from circumstantial evidence is really just evidence. It's no different than any other form of evidence. It's just evidence. You got direct evidence, you got circumstantial evidence, and there's no such thing as a case that's purely direct evidence. And besides, a case that's purely direct evidence, like a witness that says, "I saw that man put that gun in that person's face," okay?
Yep.
Or a video of that person pointing the gun at that person's face, versus a video with a shadow of somebody putting a gun in the face and then somebody getting caught a block away, and the gun being caught and the partial print or whatever. Use your imagination.
Yeah, same clothing, whatever it may be.
Same description. Yep. You put that in front of a jury and they do their job.
Yep.
It's true now that the department has become so afraid of losing cases or taking cases with a concern that cases built on circumstantial evidence are not enough for federal court, then they're really doing a disservice to the community, because most cases are, in fact, circumstantial cases.
Sure. It seems like a lot of folks, and I don't have a lot of experience with people declining cases that I thought were a slam dunk or anything, but it does seem like there's a concern about your record and where you're going to go afterwards. And if you're going to spend a couple of years as an AUSA and then you want to parlay that into a lucrative defense career or whatever it may be. I mean, plenty of people come in with ambitions and I don't begrudge them, but it seems like they really got to get after it if they're going to learn the trade. I tend to agree with you. That's kind of interesting. So,
I mean, one of the other things that I'm seeing now is that I hear a lot from my fellow law enforcement professionals is this: they just feel like they're being used as political tools.
Mm-hmm. Right. Political enforcement.
I had one officer tell me that basically cops and agents are, and I quoted him, are just used as pinballs in a cruel game where public safety is lost.
Sure.
Well, if that's true,
and we're seeing we see the consequences right now. Right.
If that's true, then public safety is indeed lost.
For sure. So what do you think? Is there a path to make this clean? Is there a path to fix this up and straighten it? And if so, what the heck is it? What does it look like?
I don't know. I mean, I'm down on the border, so obviously I'm deeply concerned about border issues. And one of the things that I don't see getting cleaned up is our caretaking responsibility to, I guess, overuse that phrase, but I truly believe in it, is our responsibility to children on the border. And I've been Very concerned about how, for example, when in the last administration, there was, if a child came across the border, whether alone or with somebody, there was an immediate, I think, attempt to provide that child with the kind of caretaking that every child deserves, regardless of where they're from. If a kid came across with somebody who claimed that that child was theirs, one of the best ways to address that is, let's say, an immediate DNA test, like a mobile DNA test. And so you can see for sure that's his uncle, that's his father, and it's not some cartel trafficker or something like that.
Right.
I think where we're real lost right now with respect to children is HHS. I don't even think that they know who these kids are. I don't think they're getting pictures of them. They're not getting identifications for these kids. And from what I understand, they're being sent off. They're being just sent off to sponsors.
Right.
And so you don't even know who their sponsors are.
Do you think that's a lack of interest, or do you think that's a lack of just being swamped and just being overwhelmed by lack of resources?
Well, it's a both. At first, it was a lack of interest. And once again, it's a law that's simply not enforced. We actually have immigration laws in this country. They're just not. It turns
out we do. Yeah. I've worked with some of those folks. And they just leave them.
Yeah. So, I mean, for example, this is one concern that's really, really caught my attention recently. You and I were talking to people that we used to work with, and you know, this issue is very, very concerning to me as children. So HHS is not, you know, they're not caretakers for children. They do what they can until the kids are placed, generally with sponsors, right?
Sure.
And so what you have is, well, what's a case? What is an HHS case? Is it an immigration case? Is there then an emergency removal? Or is it a child caretaking case or a child welfare case where they're not welfare officers?
Right.
So they rely on
they're not.
And
then it becomes like a
sponsors.
And the state has to get involved as well, because now you've overwhelmed certain state resources, I'm sure. And it's, you got any other, and I think that's very, I don't know if there's a solution to that in any of the short term, especially with the policies that we're seeing down there. You got any other special concerns that your buddies? I know you said you had a whiskey drinking group of former agents, and what's their biggest concerns that they're floating to you?
It's just the lack of enforcement. It's the lack of prosecution. So here's I think the biggest issue, to crystallize it for the public, if there's any public watching. It used to be that there was that 10%, the repeat violent offenders, the recidivists, they are responsible. 10% is responsible for 90% of the crime, whatever it is, right?
Yep. Yeah, 80-20.
The problem when you stop enforcing the law, like we used to just a few years ago when crime was still illegal, is that small group creating that chaos is going to grow. And it's not going to be 10% causing 90%. It's going to become 20%, 30%, because that percent of criminal-minded offenders, not necessarily violent offenders, but crime-minded offenders, see that even if you are a violent offender, nothing's going to happen to you over and over and over again. So why not participate in crime where it actually does pay?
It does.
So that's the problem. When that small percentage responsible for the greater percentage of crime grows, law enforcement will have no ability whatsoever to address that. It's just going to be too much.
And there's not going to be enough cops at all, because that group is not growing because the funding is not there and all that.
Yeah, they're all resigning. The morale on the border is unbearably low. Everybody wants to leave. They feel left out of the equation. They don't feel like they're participating in anything other than, babysitting or just stamping somebody's arrival and pushing them off into the interior of the United States, which is
my last two neighbors they were Border Patrol guys. One of them was a former BORTAC commander, total stud, total, American hero. and his brother was a senior supervisor, border patrol, lived right across the street from me. Awesome human being, just a great guy, good to talk to. Every time he came out, he had something interesting to say, and we just had like a lot of like really good neighbor time. And they're both, they're brothers. They both have about the same amount of time in 16 years. They're kind of at the peak of seniority for functionality and doing things. They both got injured on the job. One of them got injured, doing a search of a subject's vehicle and twisting an ankle or something. It happens. And the other, the younger of the two brothers, I believe, was injured by pulling. He threw his shoulder out, pulling someone from a burning car, which it's about as aggressive as it gets when it comes to doing like that sort of straight up humanitarian work. And the agency is throwing them out. Border Patrol is getting rid of them and told them basically, you've got a few seconds to get back on the job and get clear, or it's over for you, because we're not going to leave you on, light duty for much longer, even though they're in supervisory realms where they could be light duty and it wouldn't be a big deal. And they just feel totally unappreciated. And as an American, like who, I love Border Patrol. I think those guys are awesome. They were some of my favorite people to work with. They get paid the least. They work the hardest. They have a cool job.
There's nobody in federal law enforcement, keep going back to that issue, that cares more about children than Border Patrol agents.
Right.
I mean, they risk their lives for them. And when they see children coming across with sponsors that may or may not be their family members, I mean, think about this. If you don't know who that child is now, you're not going to know who that child is 20 years from now. You're not going to know who that child is 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you don't keep track, which they are not doing, I dare anyone at HHS to say they're keeping track of these kids. They're not. Yep. So if you don't keep track of these kids, if they're pre-teens or teens and they're male, they're coming in and they're being forced to work and earn their keep and not going to school. If they're girls, imagine the terror that they're facing, 13, 14
it's the worst girls. Scenario and we both dealt with, I'm sure, trafficked and
forced to have children and
appalling. And I mean, I saw it all the way up into
by not prosecuting that, we're allowing it.
Correct. I always tell people it doesn't matter if you're on the left or if you're on the right. Illegal immigration creates a captive victim population. They don't have access to federal law enforcement in a real way. They don't have access to local. They may not have language skills. They sure as hell don't know the culture and the customs that are going on around them. And so sometimes they come right out of a hellhole, whether it's El Salvador or some really awful situation that we can really empathize with, and they end up right in the same damn thing, whether it's in Costa de Maryland or they're in, DC somewhere, and they're just thrown into a flop house and they're screwed. They have no potential to gain the life that they basically gambled on getting, because it's not there. It's not available for them. It's available for us.
Of course it's not.
But not for them.
It's terrible. I mean, there's so many stories. I remember one story recently of a 13-year-old child having a baby. And the baby's father was her father, but in fact, it wasn't her father. He was just claimed to be her father. He was the sponsor, who really just a sponsor part of the trafficking organization. Right. So it's not incest. But it's child sexual abuse.
Sure.
And that was facilitated and allowed by not making sure not only we know who these kids are, that we get prints, we get DNA, so that if they pop up later on and they're allowed into the interior without, going somewhere safe where we know where they are, at least when they pop up 20 years from now, we know who they are.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. We got a couple seconds left. I just, any closing hope that you have as far as this getting done? What do you see anything that makes it get better?
Yeah.
Or we're on a track for a while and see how we jump the ruts.
Yeah. Well, I do think we are on a track for a while, sadly. I keep hearing things about federal law enforcement that used to only be heard or talked about in the context of local law enforcement. I can't get my cases prosecuted, for example, is something I hear over and over again. Fentanyl cases coming through, the city, not being prosecuted by the state or the federal government. That's a problem. Yep. That's a problem. You got somebody coming through on the train and they got fentanyl and a gun. They better be prosecuted. Okay. Because you don't just allow them to keep going to the next city. And I've heard stories like that from very frustrated officers in Albuquerque and elsewhere. But I do have hope. I think that people at some point are going to be sick and tired of having to worry about their car being taken from them. They're
Yep.
having a gun stuck in their face and being told what's yours and that is now mine, and there being no consequences for that. There has to be. Maybe we just haven't, as a culture and a community, suffered enough.
Maybe so. No, that's the Batman theory. That's the Giuliani in '94, I believe, was his first election, and it's like New York finally had enough after the '70s and '80s, and the subways were all covered in spray paint. And my wife grew up in that, and she remembers when the city turned around and New York City went through it, and they're going back to it. Unfortunately, it only lasted so long. It takes a lot of work to maintain yourself to be a functional society.
It's sad.
I hope I also hope that we put it in.
I think we will. I do believe in America. I believe in the country that you and I and so many others swore an oath to protect. And I think deep down, this division that we see is manipulated and created in a way that really doesn't exist. I've got neighbors that have different political views, and we love each other.
That's
so
right.
as just as fellow Americans, and I'm hoping that 80% in the middle begins to realize we have far more in common than the fringes on both sides of the political.
I agree 100%. No, I agree. I've always said that if we sat down and looked for it, 80% of it, we have common ground. We all want our kids to do okay. We may disagree on what they should be learning, but we all agree they should be learning, and we want them to be polite, and we want them to say please and thank you, and we want them to be able to go trick-or-treating and all the little things that I grew up with, and I know you grew up with similar things, and it's like the America that we signed up for. I think we all want the same thing for that. So I agree. If we could look for the similarities and not the differences, that'd be great. I try to do it on my truth. Sometimes people want to jump the gun and attack each other about not knowing that you can shoot a coyote, but it's like, hey, we're all on the same team here. And it used to be that we we're all on the same team, America. You're wearing the hat, and I've got it hanging up, and there's one flapping right outside the little trailer that I'm sitting here. It's just that's the team that I want to be on. I want to be on Team America, where we all look out and see who wants to screw with us. And then instead we've decided to do this like 50-50 tribal thing. So next time maybe we'll get a little chat further, and we'll talk about some long range solutions or some wild ideas that we can throw out, and maybe we'll get them into the discussion. Hopefully I'll get to go testify in front of Congress. We can clean up the FBI a little bit, and I do appreciate you spending your evening. Thanks for sharing your fire with me. It feels warm even though I'm not near it.
Well, happy to do so. Thank you so much for the invite.
All right, Reeve. Thanks so much. Folks, thanks for tuning in. And if you want to subscribe or you want to send a question or a comment after the fact, by all means, send it. And I'll get Reeve to give me an answer on it, and I'll tweet it back out there to however many people are following. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. Producer Phil, thank you, sir. Appreciate it, buddy.